Minutes past. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Lovely to see you all in the room. You will have noted that we took a week off last week. We decided, since there wasn't anything too pressing for us to deliver, that we were going to take the day off. And this week we had a special request to do something around crisis communications, and I think it's actually a very good idea for us to do that, especially since today I have been inundated by 1,000,001 questions around whether the President is going to announce that we are going into another hard lockdown. And this is what happens when you have an information gap. People lean into the information gap and fake news spreads like absolute wildfire. So that's fine when we're in a tourism community and we understand what we're dealing with. But what happens when you are dealing with customers, when you are dealing with your partners overseas who are wanting to know whether or not South Africa is going into hard lockdown? This is why it's so important for us to communicate properly, and this is why you have professionals who can help you communicate properly. So thank you, Marilda. I'll mention you because you were the one who came up with the great suggestion for hosting a crisis communications workshop. And tag teaming with me today, I'm very pleased to say, is Dion Collett from Take Note Reputation Management. She's going to be taking us through the slides today. So I'm going to just introduce our South Africa is Travel Ready PR Collective, and I'll start with Dion since she's going to be holding the fort with me today. Dion, if you'd unmute yourself and say hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Natalia. It's Dion Collett, and I'm from Take Note Reputation Management, based down in Durban. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Dion. Gazella. You're on mute.
Hi everyone, my name is Gisela Piercy. I am a tourism journalist and I'm the owner of African Twist Travel, and we are an inbound tour operator in Cape Town.
Thank you. And we have Amy.
Thanks, Natalia. Amy here from Scribe Consulting, based in Cape Town, and it's wonderful to have you all join us today.
Great, thanks, Amy. Not sure if anybody else in the collective is on the call. I'll give you a second just to let me know. No? Okay, I'm going to run through the rest of the team who are not able to join us today. We have Denise from Darling Lama, Shireen from the Hunter Group, Leslie Simpson from Leslie Simpson Communications, and we have Davina from Tribeca. So this is the team that is looking after you from a South Africa is Travel Ready perspective. They've been hard at work for you since June. Can you believe it? We're already almost, I think, 5-6 months in. So thank you so much for joining us on these Tourism Tuesdays, and thank you to the team who have been helping make sure that we are managing our crisis communications properly. Right, so let's get stuck into it, and I think you will all remember these reports in June, and actually these reports in June were really what sparked the creation of South Africa as Travel Ready, and they're both from a Daily Telegraph journalist called Emma Cook. On the left-hand side, you'll see the article on the 2nd of June has a headline that says South Africa to remain closed to tourists until 2021. And you'll all remember what the origin of that particular report was, because there were loads of those reports that went out to international media on that day when our minister confirmed that South Africa would only be open to international tourists. Very, very brief statement in a webinar, literally a one-liner, which went out, and it went out virally across the world. And of course, everybody was panic-stricken because what we had done was that we had spread the message that South Africa was closed until 2021, which was a pretty scary message if you were holding on to your forward book for the peak season. So of course, the PR collective was formed literally within a couple of days, and we set about trying to set the record straight. And you'll see on the right-hand side is a report on the 8th of June, 6 days later, from the same journalist, Emma Cook, at the Daily Telegraph, who then reported that South Africa's travel industry aimed for a September restart. Now, that wasn't an accidental thing that happened. That was as a result of us reaching out directly to Emma Cook to try and explain to her what the situation was on the ground. But in the absence of information, Emma took the information that she had at her disposal, which was the one-liner that happened to be mentioned in our webinar, or at least not our webinar, South African tourism webinar that was hosted way back in May, end of May. Subsequent to that, anytime Emma Cook writes a story about South Africa, Emma contacts us before she publishes it, which means that Emma will never need to lean into the information gap, because we are here to fill that information gap, and she knows that we are here to fill that information gap. And that is what crisis communications is all about. It's making sure that you don't leave an information gap for someone else to fill with possibly the incorrect information. As we have seen today with the loads of social media, WhatsApps, reports talking about the president putting us into a hard lockdown. It's just not true. It's fake news. So I'm going to hand over to Dion, who's going to take us through what a crisis is actually all about. Dion.
Thanks, Natalia. I'm sure you all have a good understanding of what a crisis is, and I think we all feel what crises are in different ways. But it is important to know that a crisis is a serious matter that impacts on your reputation, whether it be short-term, long-term impact, and therefore it needs to be dealt with in the right way. Crisis is something that either can be perceived or it is actually a real situation that happens. And it's something that is there that disrupts your business, whether it is within the area or destination that you're based at or within your actual product offering. And it is normally a negative impact on your business and can be from either somebody's comment or an actual element that has happened. Next slide, Natalia. I don't know if I can change it. Okay, what is a crisis? Well, clearly pandemic is being on the top of our list. We're all going through that and experiencing that to the worst. Other forms of crises can be flooding, droughts, water pollution, air pollution, storms, any major accidents that have happened, terrorist incidents, major crime. Crime is a huge one for us here in South Africa and is spoken about a lot from a product perspective, from a regional perspective, as well as a national perspective, and it impacts on our tourism hugely. And often the stories are not real or true to the fact that's happening there. Animal attacks, we've often dealt with situations where a game lodge has experienced an animal attack on a guest, and how is that dealt with? An outbreak of disease, something that impacts on us on a regular basis that we're not necessarily dealing with as a crisis communication situation is repeat bad service or a bad, poor visitor experience that is then communicated on either social media platforms, on TripAdvisor, or even word of mouth. All of those relate to crisis situations. And then when media get hold of these kind of stories and not necessarily having the correct information can also create an even bigger crisis than what you're actually dealing with. And then deaths. We've had to deal with a lot of deaths at hotels or at product level where somebody has died on product level. And how do you deal with that? What is it that you're needing to do? So a crisis, what is a crisis? A crisis is something that happens within your business that is not something that is a daily occurrence in your lives, something that is not normal. It is important to identify what these crises are in your life and have a plan set up ahead of time. Thank you. Natalia, just to chat on these two slides, just on what are we looking at right now?
We know we're in the midst of a pandemic, and all our lives at the moment are around crisis that originates from a pandemic. So of course I've now focused on these two slides on potential things that could come up. And the first one is a Daily Mail article where they talk about a British victim caught a deadly virus at a business conference in a 5-star hotel. Now, any of you who have not been hiding under a rock over the last week will have heard quite a lot of articles and commentary around the tin roof incident in southern suburbs of Cape Town. So that was what they call a super spreading event, and we had a whole bunch of students who caught how many? I think it was something like 75 students who caught COVID. Now, the name of that establishment, the Tin Roof, will be there forevermore. People will relate the tin roof to this outbreak of COVID. And it illustrates how important it is not only to walk the talk in terms of having your hygiene and health protocols in place and making sure that you're adhering to those, but also having your house in order from a communication standpoint. Because I haven't seen any crisis communications come out of the tin roof. All I've seen is media and social media run rampant over that particular incident. And then separate to that, I personally have been, I have managed a crisis communications incident at a hotel where one of the staff were accused of theft and stealing money out of a hotel room. And that is something that isn't just featured on media, it can be featured in social media as well. So this particular post that I've posted here happened to be on an internal Facebook group, but it could just as well have been on the company's Facebook page and visible to anybody who was looking at that company's Facebook page. Another example of health and hygiene protocols in USA Today: no way this room was sanitized, despite assurances hotels get mixed reviews on COVID-19 cleanliness. So just a perception of you not paying attention to your health and hygiene protocols and that spreading like wildfire would be damaging from a reputation perspective and require some crisis communications as a result. So,
and I think just to add to those two slides with Natalia is that it's also important to notice the timing of these elements and the timing of when crises happen and when communications go out on it. Because the fact that the tin roof incident was not dealt with appropriately, we could have, had it been dealt with properly, it could have been contained as a local story and kept within the Cape Town area. But because it wasn't dealt with correctly with the media, that spread, and it has given us an additional international impact on what we're delivering here in South Africa. So you've got to be careful of the timing of something. And I think with all of us that have worked in crisis communications, I think 8 out of 10 crises that I've dealt with normally happen on a Friday afternoon. So you need to have a plan in place. You need to know, you need to understand, and you need to communicate that with your team. What do you identify as a crisis? Write a long list down, see what those elements are, so that if something does happen like that, you're able to address it straight away. So it is extremely important to have a plan in place. Sorry, going back to the slide, why is it important to have a plan in place? The potential economic impact is devastating, as well as on the short term as well as on the long term. Don't think that if you've got something that is happening and it's a crisis that there's a post on social media that you can delete that post and it's gone away. It never goes away. It never ever goes away. And whenever you have a crisis, there is an impact on your reputation, both short term and long term. So your reputation, your product reputation, as well as you as an individual, your reputation on how you're dealing with it, will always be impacted on when you're dealing with a crisis. Every disaster or crisis attracts unwelcome attention. And how do you deal with that unwelcome attention? Just remember, be authentic and know when to supply the information and facts and when not to, and make sure your timing is on board. Perceptions do not always reflect the reality on the ground, and that is why it is important to be authentic and have the timing of your facts going out there correctly. And I think more importantly, out of all of this, have a plan in place. Make sure that that plan is communicated to your team. But more importantly, and it's something that we're going to repeat during this, this workshop, is always employ somebody that is well adverse in dealing with crises. We've got a group within this collective that are well experienced in dealing with crises, but step away from the emotional connection that you would have when a crisis happens and talk to somebody that is experienced in this. Let them guide you through the process.
So what happens when you don't have a plan or you don't have any actions, a plan in place for crisis management? And it's what we've seen today. You get mixed messages from lots of different people. Everybody becomes an expert. Everybody now all of a sudden is a COVID expert. We all look tracking our infection rates, and we're looking at the peak, and then we're looking at the second wave in Europe, and everybody's scaremongering. So this is what happens, is there isn't an expert filling the gap. The information is released. It's often released late, and it's often wrong. It's not factual. You get loads of misinformation and rumor, which of course just causes even more confusion, and it's not counted in real time. And then you start getting power struggles. So people who are wanting to be the spokespeople instead of the person who's really supposed to be the spokesperson is providing information that's not accurate. So it really is about you being proactive, not reactive. Would you like to speak to this, Dion?
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think prepare for the worst. Always come up when you're preparing that plan with the worst possible situations that can happen within the product that you're offering, the services that you're offering, but as well as to the people that you're dealing with, both to yourself as well as to your customers. Make sure that you have identified what that crisis is in good time and respond to ensure that minimum damage is done. And then after, make sure that you have an after plan after a crisis. Just because you've dealt with that crisis does not mean that the crisis is over. You need to have a backup plan. You need to restore confidence within your product. I just want to give you 2 examples of a crisis that I dealt with within the hospitality industry, where the first instance was we had an animal killer visitor on site. This was a couple of years ago, and we decided at the time, I was in operations, that we weren't going to deal with the media. We were going to deal with the family and what had happened on site, and the media would come secondary. That story spread like wildfire. It became international headlines at the time. It attracted all sorts of different media. We then, a couple of years later, had a similar incident on a game reserve, and we decided that we would call for a media conference on the day that it happened. We notified all the media. We went to them with all the facts. We had everything in line. We notified them. We did not have one single article that happened, not on social media, not within the print press. I must though emphasize that you don't deal with every crisis in the same way. There is no set formula that this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and how to deal with the crisis. Each crisis needs a separate plan, and that is why you need to be proactive by putting a plan in place that should an incident happen, how would you deal with that incident? If a different incident was to happen, how would you deal with that incident? So have your structure plan in place. Be proactive in having that. Don't put it in a file on your shelf. Share that information with your team so that they are aware of what to do should you not be available. You're on mute, Natalia.
I'm on mute.
I'm so glad I had to get to say that to you for once.
So if you are breaking down what to do essentially before, during, and after, as Dion was saying, no crisis is the same, but you need to have a framework within which you can work essentially. And then if you have that framework, you can tweak it based on whatever the crisis is at the time. And the first thing is to make sure who is the team that is going to be dealing with the crisis. Now that team understands who they are, they understand what their roles and their responsibilities are, and within that crisis communications team, there will be a spokesperson who speaks to media. So the last thing you want is for 3 employees to be able to speak to media, or you have not told your staff that they're not allowed to speak to media or deal on social media. There's got to be one port of call essentially when it comes to speaking to media. And those roles and responsibilities have to be clearly defined in this plan that you're going to create. You will need to, of course, have a contact list. So how do we get in touch with these individuals? What is the feedback mechanism that we would use? So for example, if we had a situation where we have a lodge and it's in an area where there are a lot of fires, if that is a crisis that happens, who is on that crisis communications team will possibly be someone at the local fire department, for example, those third-party stakeholders who would be involved in ensuring that you have all the information that you need to be able to communicate properly. You would need to train that designated spokesperson. Not everybody wakes up in the morning and knows how to speak to journalists. So it's a good idea to make sure that they have a good understanding of how to deal with the media and what to say and what not to say. You would need to, as Dion said earlier, identify potentially within your business, what are the potential risks that you're going to have. Again, if you're in an area where there are a lot of fires, that could be a potential risk. If you are a game lodge, it could be an animal attack. So identify in your business what those key risks or those key threats are. And then, as I said, make sure your staff understand that it is not up to them to defend the company on social media, and it is not up to them to talk to the media on your behalf. You have a strong communications team who are going to be doing that messaging. I mentioned the third-party stakeholders. So if you've got a PR company, for example, you might want to involve them early. Sorry, I've got a very annoying pesky fly buzzing around. If you, for example, as I've mentioned with the fire scenario, you've got a relationship with the fire department, or perhaps it's the police, a regional police chief, or whatever it is that is a third party that is going to help you demystify the facts around the crisis. And then who is it that you want to speak to? Who are the audiences that you are going to need to speak to? Internally, your partners, and then perhaps from a consumer perspective. Prepare your media list so you know upfront who the journalists are that you're going to be communicating with, and make sure that there is an online place where you can store information quickly that everyone within the communications team can have access to at the same time. Dion, anything to add there?
Can I add also, it's so often that we see that these plans are being put into place where, because there's a role of an MD or a CEO where they've assigned themselves to each of these tasks, it doesn't necessarily mean that as the MD or the CEO that you are the right person to be the spokesperson for the business. So you need to identify the right person within your business that is the most educated on what the situation is to be able to talk on behalf of the MD or the CEO, because that person is normally, the MD or the CEO is normally busy dealing with the crisis. So they need that space to be able to deal with the crisis and have somebody on hand that has been trained to talk on behalf of the company. But just ensure that those people, those key individuals, are trained well in advance. Thank you.
Do you want to run through the actual crisis? So
the first thing to do is to gather the team around you. Who is it that you've identified as the team? Who's talking to which media? Who's talking to your stakeholders? And more importantly, who's talking to your customers? Who's engaging with the customers to advise them of what the situation is? Identify key messages. Make sure that those messages stick to the facts. And this is why we always recommend that you do employ somebody that has crisis communication as a experience, because it is very often that one can get emotionally attached to a crisis and not necessarily see where the clear defined lines are. And you need to be able to see where these lines are to be able to ensure that the correct message goes out there. Make sure that you're authentic in your communication and that you are dealing with facts only. Constantly refine that message based on where you are within that crisis. As the crisis moves or develops, so your defined messages will then change. And don't forget that when your crisis is over, that your message continues thereafter. It doesn't just stop thereafter. Prepare a holding statement. Some of you will know this as a media statement, holding statement, it's the same thing. Once it's drawn up, hold on to it and make sure it only goes out to the right people at the right time. It doesn't mean that because you have it that you're going to distribute it to everybody. But get that holding statement, draw it up, have it approved by the necessary parties, and hold on to it and be ready to distribute when it's there. Brief the spokesperson and stakeholders. We've been through that. Inform your staff so that they're aware of what is happening on site and that they're available to support you through it. And prepare a reactive statement. Are you taking responsibility of what's happened or aren't you? And if not, what are the corrective measures that you are putting in place to ensure that this doesn't happen? Monitor news and social media content all the time. Make sure you're monitoring this pre-crisis, during crisis, and post the crisis, because this is what your reputation is built on. So make sure that you are monitoring that. And make sure that you have done the little things like disabling automated postings on social media and welcoming guests to a lodge that's burned down. You don't want to be creating you don't want to be fueling the fire, basically. Make sure that you've covered all of those things during a crisis.
On the holding statement, a little tip for you is just to think about the where, what, who, how. So if you're wanting to just put a holding statement together, it's normally very, very short and sharp, a few paragraphs that literally outlines what has happened. But essentially, at the end, you would say that you will come back. You never accept responsibility immediately. You'll say that you'll come back with information at a later stage. And that reactive statement is then after you've had some time to actually figure out what's going on and what you're going to do about it. The holding statement is literally just a door stopper, basically, to give you some time, essentially, to figure out what you're going to do, essentially. Okay. After the crisis, you still need to be monitoring those channels and seeing what people are talking about, analyzing whether or not your messaging needs to change. If you've said that you're going to be doing something in your reactive statement, then you're going to need to make sure that you deliver on that. And that speaks to what Dion was saying a little bit earlier around authenticity. Do as you say you're going to do, because people will catch you out if you don't. Make sure that you've consulted with those stakeholders, brief your spokesperson and the stakeholders, review and dissect any failures. So this is not a document that dies. It's a living document. You're going to be updating on it on a continuous basis. If you've discovered that the person you had appointed as your spokesperson isn't quite ticking the box, well, maybe it's time to change that person on your crisis management plan, communications management plan. So make sure that you are really looking critically at whether or not the situation can be improved on in future. And then reputation management. So it doesn't end there. You've now managed the crisis, that's great, but now you've got to build your reputation back. And we've seen this in the last year with South Africa and the massive publicity that we had around crime when that foreigner was murdered on Table Mountain. The whole world saw how bad our crime situation is. Everybody started picking up on crime stories in South Africa, but really there was very little positive coming out. So you've really got to try and make sure that you are balancing that negative reporting with positive reporting, but not at the same time, because you will be perceived as being a little bit insensitive. If you are this hotel, for example, that I mentioned earlier, where there was a theft and you went out and said, oh, we're so wonderful, we're so amazing, when all of the social media stuff was happening around you being a theft hotspot, it wouldn't be construed well. So it is really all about timing. And I know, Dion, reputation management really is your area of expertise. Is there anything you'd like to add here?
I think you said you've covered most of it, Natalia, but I think the key elements are being authentic, keep to the facts, and make sure that when you say you're going to do something, set a date and time and make sure that it gets done. And do whatever that can be to enhance your reputation. And it's something that is constant. It's happening all the time. So just be aware of that. Sorry, Natalia, if we can just take a quick pause. Somebody mentioned that they're not unable to put a note in the chat room. I think we have opened it up, everybody. So if anybody wants to put some questions in there, please do give it a try. Otherwise, try and direct questions to Amy and Gazella, and then they will be able to put that through to us. I do apologize for that setting error.
Yeah, sorry guys, it is open, so I'm not sure why that's not why it's not working. It's definitely open. I've just checked it. Okay, working with media. Don't be scared of media, or at least try not to be scared of media. We're quite used to working with media, so you know, for us it's kind of second nature. But I know if you've never dealt with a journalist before, it's pretty terrifying to think, well, I'm being interviewed, I'm going to be on the record, and what if I get misquoted, and da 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 da, and all of those good things. There's a trick to working with media, and you need to see it as an opportunity, not a threat. So don't go in there with the sense that they're actually here to try and catch you out. When it comes to crisis communications, remember the information gap I was talking about a little bit earlier. Speed is of the essence, which is why a holding statement is a good thing, because it's that doorstop. It's that thing that buys you time, essentially. I mentioned earlier around not having 14 different people in your organization talking to media and posting on social media. And that's because you need one voice. You will have noticed a lot in media in the last 6 months that Chafiwa from the Tourism Business Council is quoted. He is the spokesperson for the tourism private sector, and we direct a lot of the interviews through to Chafiwa, because this is the voice that we are wanting, the one voice that we are wanting to communicate as tourism private sector. It becomes very messy when you have loads of different spokespeople talking to a particular point. It also means that that narrative is distilled. So by having that same voice, Chafiwa's voice, over and over again, the message lands a lot stronger than having loads of different people talking about different messages. It is all about being proactive. It is all about reaching out and making sure that they have the information that they need. Like our friend Emma Cook at the Daily Telegraph, she now knows that if there is something that's South Africa related, and anytime we have anything, we send it to her, she can rely on us to get the information that she needs. Be calm, be honest, provide regular updates and facts, only facts. You don't need to apologize for anything. You don't need to take responsibility for anything unless you are to blame. So don't feel compelled to say, I'm sorry, or this is our fault, or just get the facts and communicate the facts before you take responsibility. Dion, anything else?
I think also a lot of the times what happens is a journalist or an editor or somebody will contact you as the owner of the business to ask questions. And you're dealing with a million of things that are happening around you, trying to resolve this crisis. Don't be afraid to say, here is my email address, please contact so-and-so, here are the contact details, and ask for those questions in writing. And commit to them for a date and time on when you will get back to them. Get the questions in writing, respond in writing by the time and date that you said you would. But don't be forced or pressurized into answering questions when you've got a million things happening around you and could possibly not be giving off your best or the exact facts that need to be given at the time.
Lyndon has pasted in the chat really good, and Lyndon does a lot of crisis communications as well. So when it comes to holding statements, you might have more than one holding statement. As the situation unfolds, you need to be communicating the facts. So as he said here, and you can read it in the chat, one might have to issue an initial holding statement, just again as that doorstopper, and one or two more while you are getting to grips with what's actually happening. And then you can start putting together the reaction with a little bit more what you're going to do. But whatever you say you are going to do, as Dion has said, you need to do, and at the time that you said you're going to do it. So if you've told people that you're going to communicate with them tomorrow at 10 o'clock, you do that. You don't leave them hanging. You have to manage their expectations.
And I also think, Natalia, with the holding statement is that you may not know what the facts are yet. Still prepare that holding statement. Let that be your first step. Prepare that holding statement to be along the lines of, we are aware of the situation. We are currently investigating it. We will get back to you. So that is the time that the holding statement starts, right from the first step. And then it will progress during that crisis time.
Okay,
Thanks,
so around messaging. Now, I love this word empathy because I use it a lot in a time of COVID. And I think really COVID has given us an opportunity in a way to be more human and to show more empathy. And I think that is an element of crisis communications we often forget about, because when you're responding on social media, for example, to someone who has an issue, you are defensive, you are on the back foot, but what you need to do is you need to put yourself in that person's shoes, which requires empathy. So in addition to being the first port of call for the information, making sure that there isn't an information gap, you do need to express empathy without taking responsibility. So you don't need to say, I'm sorry that this has happened to you, or I'm to blame, or whatever, but you can say, I imagine that this is incredibly frustrating for you. Let me see how we can help with da 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 da. I mean, that's just a really basic response on a social media post with someone who's really irritated and is blaming you for theft at your hotel or whatever it is. You don't need to accept responsibility, but showing empathy, I have always experienced, goes a very long way to calming the waters. And I really, really would say, if there's anything you take away from me today, it's to try and show empathy when you are on the back foot like that. Showing competence and expertise. So to Dion's point, tell people what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. Make sure that even if you don't have the answers, you acknowledge that you don't have the answers, but you are looking into it. Remain honest, open, and human. People at the moment are looking for brands with humanity. That is important for you to remember. They don't want to talk to a machine. So a standard response is not going to cut it. That's where the empathy comes in. You've really got to lead with that empathy. You've got to lead with being authentic. And I'm going to, I think Dion's got a great story around being authentic, so I'm going to put her on the spot and ask her if she's willing to tell you about it. And then again, making promises you can keep, because you're in the spotlight. So if you are not keeping your promises, you're going to be in trouble. Dion?
So just to give you an example, 2 weeks ago, I was contacted to deal with a crisis communication. A gentleman was put into jail on a Friday afternoon. And of course, we all know that that is the perfect timing for a crisis to happen, and nothing happens through jail time. They do it on purpose on a Friday because you can only come out on the Monday. His bail hearing was on the Monday, and SAP puts out a statement that the bail hearing had been postponed, and of course the newspapers went wild with this messaging. On Wednesday he came out with on bail, and he decided that the best way to get rid of the information was that instead of dealing with the facts and dealing with what the situation was to go out there and to do a goodwill thing, to try and push the story down. And his goodwill thing was to give a gift to the gift of the givers. That is not something that is authentic. It is not something that is honest. And people are just going to see through that kind of reaction. So you've got to be authentic. The media is such a fast-moving place at the moment that they are watching. If once you're in the news, they are watching you. From all different angles, from all different platforms. So you have to make sure that you are human in what you are doing. It is so true. And be authentic in what your deliverables are. And align what it is that you are doing as corrective action to what the crisis impact has been on your business or on your industry. Don't go so far out of the picture that you lose focus on what your actual end point of it is. Thanks, Natalia.
I do a lot of the social media stuff, and as Dion was saying, the media moves really quickly. If media moves really quickly, then social media moves at the pace of a lightning bolt. Before you've even taken a breath, there are 13 comments that have gone forth, and everybody's getting in on the act and sharing it, etc., etc. I mean, we just saw in our Twitter storm how, 8,000 tweets in 3 hours. It's a very powerful medium. So everybody will think the best thing to do when there is a post on a social media page, or perhaps you've come across it because they've tagged you, and it's on their personal feed, that we need to report it or delete it or hide it quickly so that no one else can see it. I'm afraid that is not good social media practice. Do not delete a post just because you don't like what it says. I've had cases where that has happened. They have seen that it's been deleted and it has caused even more of a storm had you not just acknowledged the fact that the post had been created in the first place. So train your staff, your social media staff, or whoever it is who's doing your social media in your company, not to delete a post just because it's not complimentary about your organization. Rather, train them to take that conversation offline. It doesn't always work, but it works most of the time. So if all you did was acknowledge the person's frustration, ask them for their contact details in a private message, and took the conversation offline, you will 9 times out of 10 stop that social media storm from happening just by taking the conversation offline. It doesn't work every time, but I can say from experience 9 out of 10 times it does. When you delete the post or you hide the post, it does not. It gets a life of its own. So do not do it, and make sure that your staff understand not to. Acknowledge the complaint, but don't apologize until you have the facts. Just lead with empathy. Understand that you're incredibly frustrated. We're looking into this. It's our highest priorities. We'll come back to you by this time. Please, can you give us your contact detail, direct contact details, and we will be in touch with you directly. And that's pretty much where it ends. Dion?
And also, you know, 2 words that we've repeated quite a bit through this workshop is being human and being authentic in what we do. Not one of us sitting around here is perfect. So each one of us within our businesses have or are going to make those mistakes. So the social media platforms that do not allow for your visitors or guests or customers to make that comment on your page, believe me, they're finding other places to make that comment. So rather allow them to make that comment on your page where you have control, you are able to react to it, than not knowing what's going on behind the scenes. Because believe me, if there is something that they're not happy with and they can't voice that opinion to you, they're voicing it to other people, which just damages your reputation out there, and you have no control over that. So rather, be real, be human. We all make mistakes. We're really sorry. We'll get back to you about that. Let me just look into it. Sorry, don't say sorry first. Just say, rather just acknowledge it. We are aware of the situation. We're going to look into it and we will get back to you, rather than hiding something or not allowing somebody to be there. Again, be human, be authentic in your communication.
Yeah, and talk like a human. Don't say, thank you very much for your complaint. We will endeavor to look into it, blah, blah, blah. Those standard responses, when you're writing back, when you are posting, post as if you are talking to the person, essentially. It will go a long way, trust me, to calming those waters. Those standard responses, I know some of you might actually have Googled in the past how to respond to a customer complaint on social media, and then you've got these like 2-liners that are very, very like uppity, and just be a human. Just talk to someone at their level. That's really all they want, essentially. Okay, so I want, yeah.
Sorry, don't get into a debate with them on social media. Just take them offline and do not go and Google and put a debate in place with them. Take it offline as soon as possible.
Yeah, taking it offline is the key, because you will get those people who are trolls, and then we'll just go. And the more you give them, the more they'll give you. So yeah, walk away. Okay. I wanted to just position crisis communications in the COVID space. And we can't really talk about crisis communications in isolation. I think actually any time, not even in a time of COVID. With crisis communication comes an element of reputation management, but certainly in the last 6 months, we as an industry have seen the importance and the value of industry alignment. And I did mention to you earlier how we were all directing our voice through the Tourism Business Council. That is an example of industry alignment, but South Africa's Travel Ready is an example of industry alignment, and how amazing and how successful it has been for us to have a community, to have a tourism tribe really rallying behind the South Africa is Travel Ready messaging. We are all marching in the same direction, and we are here to help with the messaging around that same direction. So for me, with this crisis communications and reputation management, I really do hope that the industry alignment that we've managed to pull together is something that will go forward in future, because I think it will stand our tourism industry in great, great stead. On that note then, talking about the combined efforts, so you will all have platforms that you use to communicate to your customers, whether they're trade customers or consumers. You will all work with the media in your own way. You will all have your own social media, and the power in crisis communication and reputation management is ensuring as much as possible that we are messaging the same things across those platforms, not losing your brand in the process, but just making sure that the message is aligned and that it lands. So you will see on our Travel to South Africa website that we have a trade toolkit with messaging that you can use, and we are constantly updating that. Even within the Twitter storm that we had, was it last week or the week before last? I lose track. We had 20 tweets that you as an industry took, and you ran with those tweets. So we gave you the message. You just used your platform to get those messages out. So I think that that really is a very powerful way of us working together when it comes to crisis communications and reputation management in the tourism space. Dion, anything to add?
Nope, covered well, thank you.
Okay, so a coordinated response, as I said, united marketing and media messages are needed to address perceptions of observers and potential visitors. And I'm going to be a little bit selfish and just mention here, and I've mentioned it on a webinar before, we often sit and wait for other people to market our destination. So we often say, well, you know, it's South African tourism's role to market Destination South Africa. The reality, however, is that our tourism spend, or our marketing spend rather, as a private sector, well exceeds what SA Tourism can do. Can you imagine if we aligned ourselves a little bit better as a private sector and went out with a coordinated marketing and media message to all of our international partners? We don't need SA Tourism to do that for us. We actually have the power to do that ourselves. And I know that everybody's marketing budgets have been slashed. I know that nobody has money. And those little bits of marketing that you are doing need to really, really sweat the assets. So what would it look like if we coordinated our marketing efforts a little bit better and got this message out that South Africa is travel ready on the platforms that we already own, doing the work that we already do without putting additional effort or budget behind that? Dion?
I think you've covered everything well there, Natalia.
Okay, so what can you do, essentially? We always like to give you 5 things to do. Not that you don't have enough to do in your day, because I know I do, but it's always good to have 5 things to do. And the first thing that we would ask you to do from a crisis communications standpoint is to help us listen. So we monitor loads of websites, we monitor the media, we monitor social media to get an understanding of who is talking about South Africa and what they are saying. So whenever you come across an article internationally, locally, that deals with putting South Africa in a bad light or in a good light, we would love for you to tell us about it. And you all have access to this info@traveltoSouthAfrica.org email address. Anytime you come across an article, good or bad, we need to know about it, but we don't have eyes and ears everywhere. So we would ask you to make sure that your partners are doing the same, sending you the articles and sending them on to us. And then share the good news. You know, it's not all about, oh, South Africa doesn't have enough hospital beds for a second wave, or, oh my goodness, the crime situation is out of control, or, oh, this red list, we can't have people coming into this country. You know, we've managed to find some really amazing good news stories about Destination South Africa and about people being creative when they are faced with constraints. And when things are good, you don't need to be creative. You don't ever need to change anything. And I've seen so many amazing stories, destination and product stories, in the last 6 months about how we are reinventing ourselves. So share that good news. Don't share fake news. Please get your information from a reliable source. Don't go and post on a WhatsApp group that, oh my God, they're going to close us down again, or on social media, just make sure that the information you're sharing is reliable, because you're just adding to the problem if you don't do that. Speak with one voice. Make sure that you are aligning yourself with the messaging that's going out from your industry association. So you can see what we're pushing out is all around get rid of the red list. It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. Get behind that one voice. Make sure that you're running in the same direction that we are running. And lastly, live that story that South Africa is travel ready. It's not just about saying that we are travel ready. Don't pull a tin roof. Make sure that those health and hygiene protocols are in place, that you are adhering to them, and that you are making sure that your travelers adhere to them, because we do not want to be portrayed as an industry that does not care about the lives of others. So live, when we say South Africa is travel ready, live that message. Yeah, we don't need to be shut down, essentially. That's kind of what I want to leave you with. Any questions? Shall we go through the questions that we have already received? Let's have a look here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so how do you know when to communicate with the public and when to let it blow over? It doesn't normally blow over, does it, Dion? Dion, you're on mute.
Sorry, it doesn't blow over, and there is no scientific answer to that question. I think it comes with experience on when to communicate and when not to communicate and how to hold back. It also depends on who you're communicating to, because the audience that you're speaking to will help you to determine the answer to that. A crisis never, ever blows over. It always impacts on your reputation in one way or another. So don't believe that you're going to go to bed tonight and tomorrow it's all gone. It's not. Next question is, how do we ensure the integrity of the information?
How do we ensure the integrity of the information? Okay, so that is a very good question, and I would love to say that you can look at official sources like the World Health Organization and the government government regulations, but having navigated the minefield that those government regulations are in the last 6 months, yeah, it's very difficult to say. I would say anything that's being shared on social media, like a voice note where they don't acknowledge who they are or where they're from, is already very deeply suspicious for me. And I've heard a lot of them in the last 24 hours where you have these voice notes on WhatsApp. They're going to lock us down and the guy doesn't identify who he is. It's very emotional. It's not factual. That for me is a red flag. So I want to see facts and logical facts. I want to know that whoever it is that's communicating this is someone that I can trust, or from an organization that I can trust. Dion, anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, I think when we were going through lockdown, there were quite a few WhatsApp messages that I certainly received where it was a voice note that my sister's brother's dentist's husband told us that this was happening. We cannot rely on hearsay. We need to know that the facts that are being provided to us are in fact true from the source. So if it is Dion saying that this is what is happening, then that is a true fact. Don't go by hearsay, and don't entertain messages that are shared on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a media platform. So you are just fueling that information. Just rather cut it short when you've received it and don't entertain it from there.
Okay, how often should you update? Again, this is not a hard and fast rule. It's as the situation evolves. So as you see the situation is evolving is when you need to update people. But if you say that you're going to update someone by a specific time, make sure again that you update them at that time, because remember the spotlight is on you. Dion, anything to add?
No.
Okay. Is there liability for me as the person who posts these updates? How do I protect myself? Well, if you're spreading fake news, yes, there is liability. So don't do it. Make sure that you are communicating information that has been verified from an official source. Do not post updates. And I know that a lot of you have communities that look to you for information. If you are not sure, or if the information that you have received is not from a source that you trust, rather don't share the information. Rather say you don't know, and you will try and find out. And you're welcome to ask us. We don't have all the answers, but we will always try and find it for you. Dion?
You will be held liable as the appointed speaker on a crisis. You are held liable for the information that you are putting out there. So don't just accept a holding statement and be that as the message that is going out there. Make sure that you are educated on every element of that crisis that you are dealing with, because yes, you can be held liable for that information that you're putting out there. Often it is an employee and not necessarily the MD or CEO or a director that is appointed as a spokesperson, but an employee. And you are opening yourselves up as employees to be held liable should that messaging not be correct that you're communicating out there. There are legal ways of going about protecting yourselves. So just make sure that if you are appointed in that position, that you have got yourself covered.
What would a crisis management strategy look like on a local level? What needs to be in place to ensure it works? So I think the before, and we will share the slides with you, the before and after slides that we've presented to you today will give you a good idea of what your strategy needs to look like, or what the components of your strategy need to look like. I would say that those would be the same whether it was local, provincial, or national. The building blocks are the same. It's just that you need to relate your specific scenario to those building blocks. Dion?
When you're putting a plan together, I've seen plans that come in files that are this big, just reams and reams and reams. Make sure that it's a plan that can be picked up at any time, that when a crisis hits, and anybody from your team can go pick it up and knows how to implement it in a smooth, easy way. So don't get too over technical with it. Make it simple, make it doable, and make sure that the processes are easy to follow.
Okay, what should I be watching for on social media that could be a potential issue? I think it's anything that has the potential to damage your reputation. We mentioned those right up front, those areas that would be potential risks for you. It could be perceived or real, remember? So even if you don't think that it's a real threat, even something like an influencer or a micro-influencer posting something that isn't complimentary about your lodge or your property or your experience would be a potential threat. So I think you would need to look out for anything like that, real or perceived. Okay, once I've posted an update on Facebook, how should I interact with people commenting? So I've had a lot of this where we've had a troll that's posted something, and it's a false allegation on social media, and we've responded and we've taken it online, and then you've got lots of people going in and adding their voice to support the troll. My inclination, I'm not sure if Dion will agree with me, is that I have said very clearly in that social media post that I will be dealing with this directly with the individual involved, and I then do not respond to any additional commentary around that, because again, it just fuels the fire. And in my experience, that has been the most successful way to deal with additional commentary. Dion?
100%. Put one comment on and then you leave it.
And then you leave it. Okay. Is there a difference to what should be posted on closed WhatsApp groups and public Facebook pages? In my view, no. I think if you're leading with fact, it doesn't matter what platform you lead with when you are leading with fact, whether it's a closed group or whether it's a Facebook page. Just remember, the Facebook page is a lot more open, but on a WhatsApp group, anybody can forward that information. So you might have control of it within that space temporarily, but someone else will decide whether or not it's going to go into public space.
Nothing is private. As soon as you start sharing something, it's out there and freely available for everybody to share. And I mean, a prime example was the mother that shared the hockey image to her best friend on WhatsApp, which was not appropriate a couple of years ago when WhatsApp first started. That image hit the media news within 4 hours of that message being sent out there, and it was shared by somebody that she did not even know. So even though you are sending a message to somebody that you think you've got confidence in, they still have the ability to share that out. So you need to make sure that you are on point with the factual content and reality of that message that you're putting out there.
So Sarui's asked a question which I had to grapple with a lot last year, and that was around updating tourists with regards to travel when there are protests on their route without damaging the local reputation. And I guess I would ask a question in return. What is the potential damage to your reputation if they get caught in the protest and something happens? So again, honesty for me is the best policy, and I would like to challenge you not to see it as a potentially damaging exercise to inform your traveler that there are protests on that particular route, but rather that you are helping to make sure that they remain safe. So I would tell them, I wouldn't hide it at all. Dion?
100% agree.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot worse if something happens, or if you don't tell them and they feel inconvenienced. So rather be upfront and tell them what the situation is before they get there. I know that their protests are a biggie, and they were a biggie for us last year, definitely. Yeah.
I think this point that Lyndon's made as well is important. Something that we didn't cover is that when you have a crisis communications plan in place, once you've done it, put it to the test, even though that before a crisis even breaks, so that you can make sure that you've closed all the potential gaps that there may be. I love that point. Thank you, Lyndon.
Thanks, Lyndon. And then Paul had asked around our hashtag South Africa's Travel Ready, whether the I is a lowercase or uppercase. It doesn't really matter. It's still going to pick it up whether or not you have it uppercase or lowercase. We use it with an uppercase I. So if you are wanting to tag anything, please do feel free to tag hashtag South Africa's Travel Ready, or at Travel to South Africa, which is our Facebook handle. And we will, of course, retweet, share. Happily, we've got someone who pretty much does that all day, every day. So we would love to share your good news stories. Please make sure that you tag us. Don't see any other questions. Have I missed anything, ladies? Isella, Amy? No? Okay. So Amy did do an amazing Tourism Tuesday takeaway a couple of weeks ago around crisis communications, and that is on the website. They have pasted the link into the chat, and we have also recorded the session, and we will share the PowerPoint with you as well. I know it is our IP, and we want to make sure that you are equipped as much as possible. But if you do need an expert, you can lean on any of the ladies within the PR collective who have expertise in this area if you are feeling insecure and you need some assistance. So rather get an expert to help you navigate the murky waters of crisis communications. And a last little ask from me, if I may, and that is for any suggestions that you may have around Tourism Tuesday topics in future, because you guys are living this every day, and we want to make sure that the Tourism Tuesday topics that we talk about are topics that really help you. So please do feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you are wanting us to cover in the Tourism Tuesdays going forward, and we will see how we can incorporate it. Dion, any last words from your side?
No, just thank you very much, and thank you, Natalia, for allowing me to join you on this tag team. It was great. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I love the tag team. You're not off the hook. Definitely going to be doing that again. Okay, guys, have a lucky Tuesday, and we will see you maybe not next week, but the week after. Just keep a lookout. We only want to do our Tourism Tuesdays when we've got something important to share with you. So thanks for spending the last hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a great evening. Cheers.